If you see a hate crime, don't stand by. Be a leader and call 911. If you want to talk about this issue or are concerned about this happening in your community, do not hesitate to call my office at 212-669-7250 or email us at gethelp@pubadvocate.nyc.gov.
Hi, this is Darren Block with the New York City Mayor's Fund. All great businesses deserve great interns. New York City's internship programs match our best and brightest students with employers looking for summer help. We work to pair students with the industries that fit their interests, building New York's future workforce. It's a win for local businesses and a win for our city. Get help, give experience. Hire a New York City intern. Visit nycinterns.org today.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
I'm Commissioner Greg Bishop of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. Do you need help signing, renewing, or resolving some other issue with a business lease in New York City? You may be eligible for free legal services. For more information, call 311 and ask for commercial lease assistance or visit nyc.gov/SBS. That's nyc.gov/SBS.
I'm Victor Calisi, Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Traveling around the city can become a challenge when drivers fail to follow basic parking rules. Parking spaces designated for people with disabilities ensure equal access to goods and services. Parking without a permit in a designated space or using a fake permit is illegal. For more information, dial 311.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
I'm City Controller Scott Stringer. An honest day's work deserves an honest day's pay. And if you work for a contractor on a city construction or building services project, you should be getting paid the prevailing wage. If you think you've been underpaid, call my Bureau of Labor Law at 212-669-4443. All calls will be kept confidential, and we'll fight to get you the money you're owed, regardless of immigration status.
Hi, I'm Bita Mostofi, the Acting Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Deferred action for childhood arrivals and temporary protected status are crucial protections for many immigrant New Yorkers, but the Trump administration has put these programs at risk. If you or someone you love have questions about DACA, TPS, or other immigration matters, call 311 and say Action NYC for a free and confidential legal screening. To learn more, visit nyc.gov/immigrants.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
Hi, I'm DCAS Commissioner Lisette Camilo. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services is an instrumental part of New York City government. We're comprised of more than 2,000 employees who work in personnel management, engineering, procurement, real estate, custodial services, and more. We're on a mission to be customer-focused, service-driven. To find out more about what DCAS does and who we are, visit nyc.gov/DCAS.
Hello, this is New York City Public Advocate Letitia James. Equal pay for equal work should be more than just a slogan. It should be a reality. And that's why I sponsored a law that bans employers from asking candidates about salary history, breaking a cycle of wage discrimination. If you are asked your salary history at a job interview, do not hesitate to call my office at 212-669-7250 or email us at pubadvocate.nyc.gov or call 311.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities now has a direct video conferencing line for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, ASL Direct. ASL Direct connects users to an information specialist fluent in ASL that can provide information about New York City services. If you have a friend, family member, or neighbor who is deaf or hard of hearing, let them know about ASL Direct. Help us spread the word. For more information or to get connected to New York City government, visit nyc.gov/ASL. That's nyc.gov/ASL.
The Taxi and Limousine Commission's Accessible Dispatch Program now offers citywide service. Order a yellow or green wheelchair accessible taxi on demand or in advance at no extra cost. Download the Accessible Dispatch app, book at accessibleddispatch.com or call 646-599-9999. For New York Relay, dial 711. Now you can access the city like never before.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
Hi, I'm Eric Landau, president of Brooklyn Bridge Park. Join us on the beautiful Brooklyn waterfront, where you can kayak along the river, shoot hoops on Pier 2, barbecue at the Picnic Peninsula, ride the historic Jane's Carousel, or just take a leisurely walk through the park. Brooklyn Bridge Park has something for everyone. And there's more to come next summer when we open Pier 3, the final pier to be converted into parkland. For more information, call 311 or visit brooklynbridgepark.org. See you in the park.
This is Charlene McCrae, the First Lady of New York City. Thousands of immigrant New Yorkers depend on temporary protected status, but for many people, this crucial protection has been ended by the Trump administration, and thousands of children are at risk of losing their guardians. TPS recipients are a vital part of our city. We can't let their families be torn apart. If you or a loved one has TPS or any questions regarding immigration, you can get a free, safe, and confidential legal screening. Just call 311 and say Action NYC. Learn more at nyc.gov/TPS.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
Hi, I'm Al Weber, Director of NYC Open Data. Every time you call 311, register for a city permit, or see your streets cleaned, you're seeing your government at work. You're also seeing the creation of public data. Did you know that there are over 1,900 such data sets available to the public on the NYC Open Data portal? We believe that every New Yorker can benefit from open data, and our portal gives you the tools to fully participate in a data-informed city. Get started by visiting nyc.gov/opendata.
Hello, I'm Buildings Commissioner Rick Chandler. Construction safety is our top priority to protect both workers and the public. Starting this spring, most construction workers will need to have approved safety training or they will not be able to work. For more information, please visit nyc.gov/DOB. Working together, we will build our city safely. Thank you.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
I'm Harriet Taub, Executive Director of Materials for the Arts, a city program that each year collects millions of pounds of donated items and provides them to public schools and arts organizations in neighborhoods across New York City free of charge. Our donors, volunteers, and members reduce waste while giving these materials a second life, fueling the city's creative engine. Find out how you can get involved this Earth Month by visiting nyc.gov/MFTA.
I'm Roy Mogolansky, Executive Director for the City of New York Office of Payroll Administration. Did you know city employees can save money on commuting expenses to work? When you sign up for the city's WageWorks Commuter Benefits Program, the funds for your commuting costs are set aside from your paycheck before taxes are taken out. So you pay less in taxes, up to $1,200 a year if you take mass transit, and up to $2,400 a year if parking is part of your commute. Visit getwageworks.com/NYC.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
This is City Controller Scott Stringer. Your credit score isn't just a number. It's the key to financial freedom. That's why we have a proposal to add rent payments into credit reporting. Making rent count could mean lower bills, cheaper borrowing rates, and higher scores for New Yorkers. To learn more about how to get rent added to your credit score, visit controller.nyc.gov and search for Making Rent Count.
I'm New York City's Chief Service Officer, Paula Gavin. Looking for a paid opportunity to address community needs, gain job skills, and build your leadership? Join AmeriCorps with NYC Service. Our programs place New Yorkers at nonprofits or city agencies for a year to develop volunteer programs, support city initiatives, and fight poverty. Visit nyc.gov/serveNYC or call 311 and request NYC Service to apply. 8.6 million New Yorkers together serving each other.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
Hello, this is New York City Public Advocate Letitia James. Our city was built by a diverse fabric of cultures and ethnicities. We will never tolerate any act of hate in this city. If you see a hate crime, don't stand by. Be a leader and call 911. If you want to talk about this issue or are concerned about this happening in your community, do not hesitate to call my office at 212-669-7250 or email us at gethelp@pubadvocate.nyc.gov.
Hi, this is Darren Block with the New York City Mayor's Fund. All great businesses deserve great interns. New York City's internship programs match our best and brightest students with employers looking for summer help. We work to pair students with the industries that fit their interests, building New York's future workforce. It's a win for local businesses and a win for our city. Get help, give experience. Hire a New York City intern. Visit nycinterns.org today.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
I'm Commissioner Greg Bishop of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. Do you need help signing, renewing, or resolving some other issue with a business lease in New York City? You may be eligible for free legal services. For more information, call 311 and ask for commercial lease assistance or visit nyc.gov/SBS. That's nyc.gov/SBS.
I'm Victor Calisi, Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Traveling around the city can become a challenge when drivers fail to follow basic parking rules. Parking spaces designated for people with disabilities ensure equal access to goods and services. Parking without a permit in a designated space or using a fake permit is illegal. For more information, dial 311.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
I'm City Controller Scott Stringer. An honest day's work deserves an honest day's pay. And if you work for a contractor on a city construction or building services project, you should be getting paid the prevailing wage. If you think you've been underpaid, call my Bureau of Labor Law at 212-669-4443. All calls will be kept confidential, and we'll fight to get you the money you're owed, regardless of immigration status.
Hi, I'm Bita Mostofi, the Acting Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Deferred action for childhood arrivals and temporary protected status are crucial protections for many immigrant New Yorkers, but the Trump administration has put these programs at risk. If you or someone you love have questions about DACA, TPS, or other immigration matters, call 311 and say Action NYC for a free and confidential legal screening. To learn more, visit nyc.gov/immigrants.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
Hi, I'm DCAS Commissioner Lisette Camilo. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services is an instrumental part of New York City government. We're comprised of more than 2,000 employees who work in personnel management, engineering, procurement, real estate, custodial services, and more. We're on a mission to be customer-focused, service-driven. To find out more about what DCAS does and who we are, visit nyc.gov/DCAS.
Hello, this is New York City Public Advocate Letitia James. Equal pay for equal work should be more than just a slogan. It should be a reality. And that's why I sponsored a law that bans employers from asking candidates about salary history. breaking a cycle of wage discrimination. If you are asked your salary history at a job interview, do not hesitate to call my office at 212-669-7250 or email us at pubadvocate.ny.
I'm stunned. It's so hard to write I mean, when you're working too, though. I mean, that's why, like, right, exactly. I have to start to stop. Sorry.
When you're talking, it's interrupt you.
Sorry?
You're talking, it needs to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
I've noticed, no matter how small or big the crowd is, if you don't shoot a camera at the crowd, you watch the speakers, I really think a lot of people are here. It's based upon testimony.
Oh, right.
We used to do press conferences with 3 people, basically yelling and talking. That's the trick. That's the trick.
I decided to stop it. You don't have any time. I don't have any time, and when I write, it's like, it's kind of half-cocked, and like, you know, I wrote one thing that like, I had this whole idea that, because I realized I missed like a whole, like, line of cases, and then, you know, then the deadline passed. It's like, here it goes. And I'm like, wow, you know, I had a trial, guys. They're like, sorry, I missed the deadline. Could you just insert this into the, no, it's already to the printer. Sorry. I'm just like, so I just, I wouldn't try to stake my career on my legal writing. I wouldn't mind, not mind. I just wouldn't do it, you know. So I just, so I don't know. Zachroff. So Janae went in there on voting, and they were just like.
Yes.
Yeah, those two, I mean, especially Sam, has kind of strong views on political gerrymandering.
He doesn't speak to me.
He doesn't speak to you?
No. At the very first lunch, he came over to me and said, I said, your son is doing a voter rights case. I said, yes. He kept me and explained it to him. He said,
Alex, do you know how to pronounce his name? Camarda?
Claudia's not as big as Vic, you know.
And I agree with her on that.
Start it? I'm getting ready. Is this working? Is this on? It's on? We're about ready to start, I think. My name is Cesar Perales. I chair the 2018 Charter Revision Commission. This is our borough meeting in Queens. I am about to call the meeting to order. This is the third of 5 borough hearings. We're holding 2 more next week in Brooklyn and in Manhattan. And I'd like to begin at this point by calling on a couple of our Queens Commission members to say a word or two. Kyle Bragg.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chair. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome my honorable and distinguished fellow commissioners to the great borough of Queens, a borough that represents what this city truly is, the diversity of this city, both by culture and economics. I'm very proud to be a resident of Queens for all my life. I've grown up here, went to school here in Queens, and raised my children here in the borough of Queens. So thank you again, and welcome to our borough.
Annetta?
Good evening. I too would like to welcome my fellow commissioners to Queens and Chair Perales. I'm a proud resident of Queens, have been for the last 14 years, and I've also worked in Queens for the last 14 years. As a famous sign on Northern Boulevard and 88th Street says, "Queens is the future." Queens is also the world. Here in Queens, 800 languages are spoken. 48% of our population are foreign-born. It's an absolutely dynamic space for small businesses. I would also say that in these times, I believe the future of Queens is somewhat threatened by displacement and gentrification, overcrowded schools, and low civic participation. So I'm personally really eager to hear what my fellow Queens residents have to say about how we can improve democracy in Queens and the rest of New York City.
Thank you. I will ask the other commissioners to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with Deborah on my extreme right.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Archer, and I'm a professor at New York Law School.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dale Ho, and I am the director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project.
Good evening. My name is Mendy Marachnik. I'm the president of COJO of Staten Island. One brief Queens thing, Mr. Chairman. I grew up in Queens at age 15 in Rockaways. So coming off the train today, I had one thing in mind: to go to the water, to go to the beach. I needed it. But it's an honor to be here in Queens. Thank you.
My name is Cesar Perales. As I indicated, I have the honor of serving as chair. I too have roots in Queens, specifically Corona, where I lived as from the age of 14 to the age of 24. But that's not really the only thing that qualifies me to serve as chair. I've also been a former Secretary of State, where I had responsibility for oversight of local governments. I served as deputy mayor of New York City, and I actually litigated issues regarding elections in New York City, held by New York City.
Good evening. My name is Una Clark. I am a former member of the New York City Council. I'm a trustee for the City University of New York, and it's my honor and privilege to be able to serve. I am the product of a charter revision in 1989 that caused the election when the City Council moved from 32 to 51. I was one of the lucky ones that was elected for the first time, that really talked about the diversity of the City of New York, when an immigrant from Jamaica, West Indies, could become a New York City Council member as the first immigrant woman ever to be elected. So I take this very seriously, and as we look at how we deepen and make sure that our democracy works for everyone in the City of New York, I'll be paying close attention to the testimony that we hear, and that we can come together and make sure that we make this city the place that all of us want to live and have our children raised and born. I forget to let you know that following my own election to the New York City Council, my daughter, Yvette Diane Clark, succeeded me in the New York City Council, and she is now a member of the House of Representatives. So she went to Congress, and I just wanted to see what the possibilities are when communities work together, and we are looking forward to a city that has everybody participating. So this is my reason for wanting to serve. Thank you.
Did the Queens commissioners get a chance to say what they do for a living?
Yes, well, again, I'm Kyle Bragg, Secretary-Treasurer of SEIU 32BJ. Union 165,000 members throughout New York City and across the East Coast, from Florida to Massachusetts. Here we have thousands of our members who live and work right here in the borough of Queens, and hopefully shortly you'll hear from a few of them.
My name is Aneta Sicharan again, and I am the Executive Director of Chaya Community Development Corporation.
Hey, good evening. My name is Marco Carrion. I'm the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs. Thank you for inviting me to Queens today.
Let me now say for the record that we have a quorum. Let me begin by explaining that in New York City, under the Home Rule Charter, the mayor gets an opportunity, when he feels it's appropriate, to form a charter commission. This is a commission made up of what I think is very distinguished members. They are volunteers. They don't do this for a living. And we are giving of our time because we very much believe in what the mayor gave as his principal reason for forming a charter revision commission. By law, this commission can examine any part of the city charter, and we intend to do that. But every mayor has a reason for appointing a commission. And Mayor de Blasio felt very strongly that we, as a city, had to look at our charter to see if there was anything that we could do to improve democracy in our city, to get more people to vote, to make it more fair for people, and even to get it more opportunities for more people to run for office. So most of the comments we've heard so far relate to this making New York City more democratic and making elections more fair. Let me also say that we have conducted extensive outreach in advance of this meeting and in advance actually of all of the meetings that we're having. And we will continue to have meetings through the summer. So this is only one. We will be back in Queens. The meeting is also being live streamed, and there are lots of folks watching us, not just the commission, but listening to the questions that are being asked by the audience. We also have sign language interpreters for those who need it. And with that, I think we are ready to begin. The public testimony is open to anyone who wants to speak, as long as it's comments to some aspect of the charter. We don't want to waste your time talking to us about something that has nothing to do with the city charter, over which we have absolutely no ability to change. I will limit the length of time for each speaker to 3 minutes. We have a significant number of people who have signed up. With that, let me call the first speaker. It is Alex Camarda from reInvent Albany. He is their senior policy advisor.
Good evening, Chair Perales, members of the Charter Revision Commission. My name is Alex Camarda. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for reInvent Albany. At the Commission's first hearing in Staten Island, reInvent Albany testified that among the fastest growing areas of undue influence or its perception in city government is donors who contribute to city-affiliated nonprofit organizations and also do business with the city. In our previous testimony at the first Charter Commission hearing, we called for more transparency of these types of donations and also to restrict their size. And in tonight's testimony, we wanted to provide some more specific recommendations on this topic, in part in response to the questions that the Commission members raised in Staten Island and also some additional conversations we've had since then. So our first recommendation is to limit contributions to all nonprofits that are considered affiliated with elected officials. So the city in 2016 passed Local Law 181, and what that does is it makes donations to nonprofits affiliated with elected officials limited to $400, but only if those nonprofits spend 10% of their budgets on public-facing communications featuring the elected officials. And the city's Conflicts of Interest Board actually issued rules on the affiliation of nonprofits with elected officials, which I listed in the footnotes, but they go to the definition of what affiliated with an elected official means, which was asked by the commission in Staten Island, and so I thought that would be helpful for you to have. We believe that the donations should be limited more so than they are currently, even if the public-facing communications do not feature the elected official. However, we believe the limit could be higher than the current $400 doing business limit, but we do not have a specific number to recommend at this time. We also believe the donation should be restricted for a longer time period to 180 days after a donor has ceased doing business with the city. Our second recommendation is to restrict donations beyond nonprofits affiliated with elected officials to those donors who are doing business with the city and making donations to city agencies, public authorities, public benefit corporations, and local development corporations. So as I mentioned, the law I spoke of in 2016 only really relates to nonprofits affiliated with elected officials. But what we have seen is that many donors actually give contributions directly to governmental entities while they are doing business with the city. And so we think that needs to be addressed. Third is a transparency item. We would like to see published as open data the exact amount of all donations by donors doing business with the city, not only to nonprofits affiliated with elected officials. That transparency will begin in January of 2019. We'd also like it to see it extended to these other governmental entities I already mentioned. I did mention at the testimony in Staten Island that there is disclosure currently. It's under a different regime. It's advisory opinions of the Conflicts of Interest Board. That disclosure is in the form of a 500-page PDF issued every 6 months, and the dollar amounts are in ranges. It does include contributions not only to nonprofits seemingly unaffiliated with elected officials, affiliated with elected officials, and also some governmental entities. But we think the open data element of it is very important because currently we can't do an analysis of all those contributions and then compare them to the doing business database because they're not in a spreadsheet format that makes that easy to do. Anyone looking at those contributions would have to go through them by hand and actually either scrape the PDF using technology or enter them manually in a spreadsheet to begin that analysis. And our last recommendation is related to volunteers. We have seen select instances of what we're calling volunteers doing major policy work for the city, making appointments. We'd like to see instances where that occurs to have those individuals follow the city ethics laws, at least in some form, so that, for example, you are all members of this commission. I assume you're all volunteers. We would not want to see a scenario where task forces, commissions, city board members would also be raising money at the same time for affiliated non-for-profits. We think a choice should be made and volunteers should do one task or another. So I'll leave it at that because of the restrictions of time, and I thank you for your time tonight and welcome any questions you have.
Frankly, if anyone who was not expert in this area heard your testimony, they'd think it was very esoteric. Maybe you can give us an example, without naming names of not-for-profits or anything else, of what it is you are concerned about that is currently allowed by law.
So yes, I am reluctant to name names in part because we haven't done...
I'm asking you not to name names.
Systemic analysis. But what we're concerned about is we have a very strong campaign finance system. There are limits on the contributions made directly to candidates. And we think that the nonprofits, particularly when they're tied to elected officials...
Well, how would a nonprofit be tied to an elected official? It would be Una Clark would have created her own not-for-profit? I'm not sure what what you mean by that.
So I think in two ways. So you can have an elected official that has a nonprofit. We've seen instances of that. And there are also nonprofits that are tied to city agencies, and we're concerned about entities or individuals doing business with the city and making a large contribution to one of those nonprofits and having either business before the elected official or business before the agency, which when we go through this spreadsheet I mentioned before that's makes some of the donations available now, we see instances of that. And so that's concerning given the low contributions and the strong city campaign finance system that seemingly could be circumvented through contributions to the nonprofits, or at least creates an appearance of that.
Any of the other commissioners have come?
I am looking for some clarification. In 1991, when I became the first elected, the districts that were around us, which was, I can just tell you who the representatives were, Mary Pinkett, who was an African-American, Williams, who was an African-American, because we're also African-Americans, but immigrants. We made sure that the district lines would not create a competition among them. And so we look at our numbers within our community, and we made sure that the district would begin at Empire Boulevard, where everybody think that people didn't vote. And that's where I wanted to represent, because I wanted to empower. So there was not a not-for-profit in the community that I knew of. So that I created a vendor's market at Caton and Flatbush Avenue and had to give the money to a not-for-profit agency. So I had to help them think out how would we do this without a conflict, and to make sure that there's accountability to the city and that books and records will be kept open so that at any time anybody wants to do an audit, they would know that we are doing it for the betterment of the community. What would you say about a member who feels that there's not enough in his or her community and want to help to create an engine that drives the community? How is that illegal?
That's not something that we specifically have a position on. I mean, we have seen instances, obviously, where elected officials have started nonprofits. I think some of the factors that the Conflicts of Interest Board laid out are important. You know, if an elected official is currently serving and they also control a nonprofit, and contributions are made to that nonprofit by donors who are doing business with the city or specifically with the body the elected official serves in, I think that at least creates a perception issue if the donations are significant.
Thank you for coming here to testify, Mr. Camarda. I was just wondering if maybe you could speak to why you think some of these changes should be instantiated in the city charter as opposed to, say, just a local law enacted by the city council.
Well, we have seen that the council obviously did address this, we think, in part through local law. And you know, the question about the charter versus the administrative code, I think, is a tricky one. You know, to my knowledge, the campaign finance system is mostly in the administrative code. I understand in 2010, when the Charter Revision Commission put on the ballot and the voters approved disclosure of independent expenditures, that was actually put in the charter, and I think it was because the Charter Revision Commission at that time wanted to address it. I think if the council was to have taken that on, they might have put it in the administrative code. So I think the balance between the administrative code and the charter is something that has long been talked about in this city, and I'm not sure the charter is kind of the framework or a constitution that it might be envisioned to be. It seems like there's a lot of, between the administrative code and the charter, there's a lot of fluidity.
I guess one of the things that I was thinking about was if we're talking about setting precise dollar limits on things, you know, the process of revising the charter is a lot more cumbersome than, say, amending the administrative code. And, you know, I'm not that familiar with campaign finance in particular, but I just wonder if, it makes more sense to put specific dollar limits in the code if possible. There may be some inertia there that prevents that from happening. But there, as instead of in the charter, which could be hard to revise, and maybe over time those numbers would need to change more frequently than the charter gets changed.
I think ideally the structure and functions and duties of the agencies would be in the charter and the manner in which elected officials are chosen. I think city government has evolved such that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of fluidity between the charter and the administrative code. Part of our role is to raise these issues and then leave it to the commission as to what they feel is best in terms of where it should go. And then also, I think the issuing of a report is an opportunity to raise these issues, whether you address them or they're addressed by the council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it is something we're thinking about, because we will be writing a report. Not everything is going on the ballot, but we will be hearing about issues that will not necessarily be on the ballot, and we may want to say something about it.
Thank you.
Mohan Gowali Jerry, I'm having trouble. You represent the Nepali American community? I'm trying to get to the organizations first. So will you pronounce your name?
Good evening, Chair and respected person. My name is Mohan Gewali Chetri. Originally, I came from the Nepal, all the way
Could
Asia.
you put that a little closer?
Asia. And now I'm working in the non-profit organization, Nepali American Community. And there are more than 100 people, 100,000 people are in the New York City and the Buffalo, Syracuse, Long Island, and the 5 borough as well. And due to lack of language, some of them are not going to school or working. They are staying home, because of the language. So I like to request Chair and all the respected one, please add the Nepali language and other language, Asian language, to the New York City official as a in the hospital, library, school. That way we can more easy life for the next generation. Thank you.
This here in the borough of Queens, it seems to me that this is the right place to raise the issue of the government's ability to respond to the citizenry in different languages. Any comment among my commissioners?
I would think that any barrier for language, do you have a lead person that would help to interpret the language so that put in the mother tongue of the United States, which is English, to be able to translate and to strengthen what you're trying to do?
Okay, recently one of our representative, assembly member, Mike Miller, he introduced the one bill, Nepali language bill in DMB, and the other official as well. It's still in the pending in the Albany. Hopefully it can be work in the future.
Do you have a sense of how many of your nationals are here and where they reside?
Okay, it's for recorded census 2010. It says only 9,000 in the record, but there are, I think, like 90,000 other are missing, because they scared to register the census. And if you go really in the specific in the their apartment, every living room they are living, every basement they are living because of their language as well too.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm Kyle Bragg. The city has initiated a language access in a lot of their bureaucracies, institutions. Are you saying that Pali is not one of those languages that are offered through the city's language access?
No.
That's what he's saying.
I, too, would like to thank you for your testimony and for raising this very important issue. As somebody who works with the South Asian community, I see every day how this is a problem, and language access remains a very, very serious issue for our city. So I just want to thank you for raising the issue.
Thank you.
And I want to encourage you to continue to advocate on this matter. I don't know that it is within the realm of the charter revision to address this specific issue, but I want to acknowledge that your issue is important and it's heard.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Next speaker is Tom Speaker.
All right, so good evening. My name is Tom Speaker, and I'm a volunteer member of the leadership team for the New York chapter of Represent Us. It's an anti-corruption organization. Represent Us's mission is to pass tough anti-corruption laws in cities and states across America and to legalize corruption that has come to define modern politics. So thank you for holding this hearing today and allowing me the opportunity to testify. So, New York City currently has one of the best public matching systems in America. Currently, up to 55% of a campaign spending can be provided by the city, and that's 55% more than many other cities in America. But despite our progressive system, city elections are still significantly influenced by wealthy donors. So through an analysis that Represent Us in New York conducted with Reinvent Albany, we found that nearly 90% of New York City Council members' campaign funds for the 2017 elections came from donations over $175. So some might not think that $175 is a large contribution, but in the context of everyday New Yorkers' lives, it is a large contribution. Consider a 2016 study by the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development. That study found that nearly 60% of New Yorkers don't have enough savings to cover 3 months of household expenses. It's unlikely that any of those residents are able to donate more than $175, let alone just $100 or $50 to a political campaign. So this signals that the vast majority of campaign funds are not coming from everyday constituents, but rather from wealthier donors. And the influence of big money in New York campaigns is even more alarming when you raise the threshold. Our analysis found that 68% of council members' campaign funds came from donations over $500, and 54% come from donations over $1,000. So basically, in order to run a competitive campaign, it's much easier for candidates to solicit funds from wealthier donors. Case in point, the spending limit for city council candidates is $182,000, and so even if they enroll in the matching system, they need to raise $81,900 of that on their own. If they wanted to run a campaign solely on donations of $20, they would need to find 4,095 people to make a donation. It's far easier to convince 41 people to make a contribution of $2,000. So the role of big money in politics may result in policies that do not benefit ordinary voters, and subsequently can discourage residents who want to become involved in city politics. And while we cannot say for sure whether larger donations impact a candidate's decisions in office, a lot of the recent corruption trials and investigations in New York State do not inspire much confidence. We think that one way to rectify this imbalance is to increase the available amount of public spending in elections. Doing so would involve more citizens in the political process and relieve the pressure to solicit donations from those with the deepest pockets. Represent Us supports a stronger public matching system as embodied in Councilmember Ben Kalis's proposed 2018 bill, introduction number 732. That bill would raise the public financing cap for New York City elections to 85% from 55%. The new city council's term has begun after another election with low voter turnout. We really think that by bolstering its public matching system, the city has an opportunity to boost civic engagement and build greater faith in our elected officials. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Does anyone have a reaction?
I am fascinated by the fact that you're young, you're bright, you're smart, and I think that your generation is going to do a lot of good in terms of putting folks on notice about being corrupt, big money in politics. But I would want to just ask you, how would you think, because the playing field is never level, the variety of persons who offer themselves for public office comes from the very poor to the very rich. How do you balance the scale for a person? I always use myself since I don't want to be criticized. When a person like myself offered myself for office and ran in a community that never gave political contribution on a whole from where they came, and to switch it and say, you need to write me a check for $25, $15, $20, how would you educate the electorate about how to become involved and how to make their contribution?
Well, one way would be through a system that notified citizens about the public matching system. Like basically Seattle recently introduced a voucher system. And they don't have everybody participating in it right now, but there are more people participating as the program has progressed. And basically you need to have...
What is a voucher system?
A voucher system is where every single citizen will get up to $100, like maybe 4 vouchers of $25 to give to people in a political campaign, to candidates. Basically, Seattle invests around $2 million in that kind of system.
Who qualifies? I mean, anybody raises their hand, say, give me some of your vouchers?
What
candidate? What does a candidate have to do to qualify?
They do need to receive a certain amount of vouchers to qualify for that system. If they just get one voucher, they can't get the $25. They need to hit a certain number. I don't know the specific number.
But they don't have to raise any money on their own?
So technically, they would not have to. There are campaign spending limits in Seattle for how much each person can spend and receive. But yeah, if they just ran solely on vouchers alone, they could just use those.
What would you say about what would prevent a millionaire from saying, I don't need $1 to finance my campaign. I just want to be a political mogul, pay for my campaign, while a poor person who's going in heart and hand to improve the quality of life in their community. How do you level that playing field?
Well, under the current elections, or under the current system, like we can't guarantee that that's not going to happen. Basically, what a better matching system would do, and what the current system does, in my opinion, is it gives people from, I mean, without as much money, more opportunities to participate in the elections, because the city will provide those funds for them. But yeah, we don't have any guarantee that a wealthier candidate will come into the process.
I'm just interested in knowing, has the voucher system produced the outcome in which it was created to produce? I assume the purpose is to have the electorate now, because they're given these vouchers, participate greater in the process, right? That without using their own money, they can now take these vouchers and give it out to candidates of their choice. And so, and I guess the result should have been to increase the participation of the electorate. And I'm interested in knowing, has that happened, or have people engaged more in politics now? And has it, as my sister Una Clark has indicated, been able to still level the playing field at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's happened a lot. So they sent out, I think it was 2 million vouchers, to be specific, and then about 73,000 ended up being used. To be clear, I'm not advocating for a switch to a voucher system. I just believe more in, improving the system that we have. One thing that was shown in our data was that people who participate in that public matching system get a lot more money from small donors than people who are not participating in that system.
Yeah, I think we're very interested in looking at public matching. I think all of us on the commission are interested in that subject. So I, for one, very much appreciate your comments.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a representative from an elected official, the Chief of Staff to Assemblyman Hevesy of the New York State Assembly. Your name is Brent Whitesburg?
Yes, sir. How are you today?
We are well.
Thank you for having me. Just to be clear, I'm not here in my capacity as a Chief of Staff. I'm here as a lifelong resident of Queens, specifically resident of Forest Hills, and I'm also just very happy to be here. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, Commissioner Carrion. Good to see you, and thank you for hosting us. The topic that I'd like to discuss today, just quite briefly, is the need for voter reform. As I stated before, I'm a lifelong resident of Forest Hills, New York. Queens, I live there now, I work there now. Assemblyman Hevesey's office is a 5-minute walk from where I reside, so obviously I have deep care for the city of New York as well as the borough of Queens in particular, even more now Forest Hills in and of itself. And being that I have been a voter in this city for as long as I've been able to vote, there are certain things that I see that, in my opinion, do need to change. And the city charter is ripe for being an area to have that change. Specifically, I believe that voter reform, to my knowledge, falls under Section 1053 of the charter, which addresses voter reform. Now, one of the things that we could say, that we could look at when I say voter reform, is more accessibility to vote and engaging more individuals to vote. So, for an example, there was a Daily News article published by Greg Smith on November 8th, 2017. And in Mr. Smith's article, he stated that only 21.7% of the 5 million people eligible to vote in the city of New York did in fact vote. So what does that mean? That means, in my opinion, that people are just not getting out there, or there are barriers created not allowing them to vote. So some of the ideas that I, just doing some quick research, have maybe suggested is maybe switching or having an alternative system of being able to register to vote. For example, in Estonia, miles away from Queens, no doubt, but in Estonia, they allow their voters to vote via online, through an online resource. Maybe we try and implement something like that through a pilot program here. Maybe we create an app that's focused to the city, something along those lines. In Sweden, upon birth, you're automatically enrolled as a voter. There's no barriers to vote. Once you're born, you're a voter, and you're registered into a system like that. So something like that. In addition, I think more awareness, such as switching to an email-based system, would help. So, like I said, as a resident of Forest Hills, I was able to receive the packet that had all the candidates, their platforms, so on and so forth, but I believe a digitized version of that would also help encourage individuals to vote. Lastly,
you got that package by mail? Is that what you're saying?
I did, yes, by physical mail. Lastly, I believe that the time is apt to engage young voters. A recent poll that was conducted, 60% of youth are wanting to vote now, whereas previously in the 2014 election, I see my time is up, 25% only wanted to vote. So the time is right for those individuals to become engaged. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Any questions?
With regard to younger voters, do you have a specific recommendation in terms of age?
I don't. Well, so younger voters, right? So that time, that age range goes from 18 to 34 is what's considered a young voter, and that's who's polled, right? So what I alluded to before, that the 60% of individuals that are now more engaged since 2014 to vote, that's based off of a 6,000 person poll of voters 18 to 34. So that's part of it. And also, one of the things that I think is important is making people understand why it's important to vote. You know, even if it's in an uncontested election, we see that a lot. Even in Forest Hills, on a city level, there are uncontested elections, but you still need to get people out to vote in primaries, to vote in general elections. And there was a lot of stuff going on this year, especially in the state legislature, about when our primary voting date should be. So I think there needs to be better publicity about it, and kinder publicity about it.
Just a quick question. If
Yes,
you
sir.
wanted the Board of Elections or even the City of New York to email individuals the information you say you received by mail,
Yeah.
how would they get the emails of the voters?
That's a great question. I don't know, but that's something that we could discuss. It could be a kind of, so I think it's better to be proactive than reactive, right? And with that being said, we have members of our city council that represent every part of our city. There could be, just like participatory budgeting, there could be something where we do a marketing campaign where individuals go out, they say, hey, if you'd like to sign up for this email, let us know. There are constituent databases. My office has a constituent database where we could do constituent outreach. There are ways that we could help engage individuals in our communities without stepping over boundaries that would violate their privacy.
Do you see a role that our schools can play in engaging young people so that by the time they graduate, they're already voters and they know how to vote? How would you see that, and what would you recommend there?
Well, Ms. Clark, I appreciate that question. And I do think we see that to a certain extent. You know, when you're a senior in high school, you'll have individuals come to the high school and try and register you to vote because you're either 18 or you're 17 turning 18, so you'll take the form and you'll hold on to the form. I think we have to do a better job of engaging our of-age voters, and one way we could do that, just because we're talking on the city level, is engage the CUNY system. Right? That's prime targeting for that age range. You have likely 18 to 22-year-olds, not counting individuals going for their master's, law degree, so on and so forth, that are in the 22 to 34 age range. And we could go to those schools and you could table in their student unions once a week for a period of, I don't know, 4 weeks, or between a certain time frame, X and Y, that would say this is important, this is our educational part, and that's how we could help. Going even further than that, and what my office has done on separate issues, we engage political science departments, right? So I'm an alumni of Hofstra University, for example. I still have a very good relationship with Hofstra University, where if it was something, although it's in Long Island, this just goes to the greater point, is that you can engage the chair of the political science department at Hofstra, and they will get the word out to their teachers that could then filter down to their classrooms. So there are different ways of engaging youths of this age. Sir?
I just had a question. One of the reforms you mentioned was some form of automatic voter registration, which has been growing around the country. And you know, one of the concerns I sometimes hear about automatic registration when people talk about it is that you might get people who are not eligible to vote inadvertently automatically registered, and they could face, you know, civil, even criminal liability as a result of that. Sometimes I hear other people propose something like election day registration, right, which in theory should be just as accessible as something like automatic registration, but because there's a voluntary component to that, you're less likely, I think, to inadvertently register someone who is not eligible and exposing that person to any kind of liability. But the pushback I hear on election day registration sometimes comes from candidates or civic groups that do get out the vote work, and they say, well, we need people registered ahead of time so that we have lists. We use those lists to do get out the vote efforts, and that's really important for civic engagement. So as someone who works for an elected official, I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and whether or not, you know, having people registered in advance is something that's really critical, or if election day registration is just as good for your purposes as compared to something like automatic registration.
So I appreciate the question, Mr. Ho. I don't believe that I don't believe we should get caught up in the weeds as to what it is, whether it's automatic registration or using an app or whatever it may be. I think the fundamental point is that there needs to be easier access to voting, right? It needs to be more accessible, where, you know, I personally like the idea of an app. I just think we do I'm attached to my smartphone. I'm sure you all are, okay? So I think that if I could go online, register online through an app, know my polling place, know who the candidates are, and I could see all of that through an app on my cell phone, that will get me energized to support a candidate. Now, as far as...
So I agree with that entirely. You know, the concern, I think, is that that I'm identifying as something that's separate, is you have the registration cutoff.
Right, that they're not going to know.
Right, even if you have the app, right, you may not download it until, you know, the registration deadline, but if you have some kind of election day registration, sure, that'd be great. You could use the app on your way to the polls, right? But I hear that sometimes elected officials or politicians
are
candidates
skeptical to that because they want to know who your prime are, your double prime, your triple.
Right. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that particular concern as someone who works for.
So someone that's worked on
official.
campaigns and works in the field, I don't see it as a concern. If you have a good candidate and they are presenting good, listen, not the good candidate doesn't always win. Look at our president, okay? But you know, it's a risk that you take. But any of these programs, when there's innovation being made, you're always taking risks, okay? Now, for example, I live in a district, my boss has been in office for 13 years. I don't necessarily know if same-day registration would affect any challengers as opposed to not same-day registration. You know, that's not for me to say. But as someone that's worked on campaigns and has worked in the field, I only see it as being a benefit to someone. This all goes back to someone having the ability to vote for somebody that represents their values and their voice, right? So if we get more people than 21% of the voting eligible population to come out, and the person that the GOTV has supported and has been door knocking for still ends up winning, and now they just win by a larger margin or a larger percentage, I think that just goes to back their point and prove their point. And each district and each constituency will get the leaders that they all, or the majority of which, approve of.
Mr. Weitzberg, I want to thank you. We're really running late, and we've got a lot of people who want an opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Lance Crowell. Is Lance in the room? Roxanne Delgado.
Hello. You know, I came here. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Again.
Yes.
I came here a long way from here because you didn't respond to my email.
You sent me an email?
Yes, the charter revision email. I sent it twice.
Does it?
Well, my time is going.
It may be that I didn't see it. I mean, I know I didn't see it.
Well, the email was in regards to transparency and independence. I felt that just like the Pay Raise Commission did 2 years ago when they held hearings throughout the city, that they every submitted testimony or communication with the commission was posted online for review by the public.
I see.
And I would like request that this commission does the same, please.
Well, let me take that up with the staff. This is the first time you've hit me with that. I don't know.
But
I don't know how tough it would be to do.
It's not tough. It's not like you're getting that many testimonies to begin with, to be honest. But any testimony should be posted on the website, please, including myself, my testimony.
Well, thank you.
And so I might as well continue, please, if you don't mind. Thank you. And in regards to voter participation being low, it's because elections are non-competitive. And again, you have to make them elections more democratic by leveling the playing field. It's never going to be even, but make it more fair. Simply, the CFB matching program, again, is not a gold standard. This nonsense that's being repeated, that's the best program. It's not, because if CFB did not exist in last year's citywide and local races, the races will have been more even and therefore more democratic.
You said this last. Is there a particular city or state where you think it is better than New York, so that we can look at it?
I could look for it later on tonight or tomorrow and send it to you.
All right.
I didn't do that. I'm just criticizing my own city, but
I understand.
But I'll do that. I mean, I could look at the numbers. I mean, that's not an issue. But again, if CFB didn't exist last year, the citywide and local races would have been more competitive, because all the opponents would have that were not able to raise enough money or be qualified for matching funds, would have meant that the leader or the incumbent would have not received matching funds to demolish their opponents. So again, that makes it more undemocratic, not less. And going forward, it thinks the way to improve voter participation is to make term limits stronger, because New Yorkers voted 3 times in 1993, 96, and 2010. This issue should be put to rest. People need to move on and accept it as the will of the land, as the will of the people. And the reason why it needs to be put to rest is because there's rumors that the following city commission, charter commission held by city council, will address term limits again. So I think you should make term limits stronger by making it seem that it cannot be readdressed for at least till 2035, and also that any elected official that was termed out should not be allowed to return to his old seat again after he's been turned out from that old seat. So we have people who resurfaced from the dead and return to their old seat. And lastly, well, wait, let me.
Well, given that you want us to post your comments, why don't you just send
Well, I
those
wrote
in?
this on train, but okay. But the last thing regarding even the 2010 City Charter Revision Commission admitted that elections were undemocratic because they grandfathered 2009 elected class by stating that it will be unfair for them to be changed at the last minute to 2 terms from 3 terms because 3 terms was the law of the land.
We're not going to face that issue this time.
All right.
So you don't need to worry about that.
All right.
All right?
You see, I am worried, as you can see.
All right.
But all right, thank you. I'll send it to you.
Thank you for testifying.
Can you please post the testimonies on your website, please, for transparency?
I certainly will try.
Thank you.
All right. John Kelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Kelly, and I'm a community board member of Community Board 11. If you're going to quote me, please mention that tonight I speak for myself and not the community board. Before I joined community board member, I was a public member, and for a decade before I worked with community boards in the different boroughs. Across the city, our community boards are failing in the same ways. Positions are functionally lifelong appointments, which can create a culture of privilege. After decades on a community board, board members often act like judges over their neighbors' efforts instead of partnering to make the community better. For a layperson to get a good idea through a community board, they often have to have connections with someone on the board, especially hard when the boards do not have the same culture of the areas they serve. Without strong oversight from the people who appoint them, community board members are given the right to only discuss issues that help them individually, either financially or personally. One answer to this is to implement term limits. By only being able to serve for 8 or 10 years, it ensures that the old guard is never so ingrained that it has the power to stop progress. By continuously changing our representation, we make sure new voices don't leave the process because they are disillusioned from waiting decades before they have served their time. In our rapidly changing neighborhoods, term limits can help engage new residents into the civic process, giving their communities some oversight of their surroundings. Most importantly, term limits shift the culture of the board themselves. If a community board member knows they are not going to be on the board forever, they may treat other non-board members with more respect, since they know there will be a non-board member soon. Term limits help make corruption more difficult. By diluting lifelong power, we decrease the judgmental culture and force cooperation. Bribery would also decrease, since any paybacks would be shorter-lived. Without term limits, we have created a culture that slows community-led change. Younger voices are especially heard, since the decades needed to serve their time by definition age people out of certain demographics. I hope you agree that implementing term limits, we can help upgrade the community board system to something that better serves our great city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let me just say that we're getting a lot of comments about community boards. This one about term limits is new, but I think we're going to have to devote a great deal of time to the issue of community boards.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we just? All right. Well, thank you very much. I think there's a Mr. Hernandez. It says, is it Saul Hernandez? Good evening, Mr. Hernandez. And what is your first name? Is it Saul?
Saul Hernandez.
I thought it was Saul. Just couldn't read the handwriting.
Thank you for having me. Okay. Good evening, Commissioner Chair Praso and Commissioner members. Thank you for holding tonight's hearing. On behalf of myself and my fellow members of SEIU 32BJ, we applaud your efforts to strengthen our city democracy and ensure every New Yorker's voice is counted. Our union is 163,000 strong here in New York City. We represent 85,000 building service workers and who keep our cities and residential buildings, schools, office, stadiums, airports clean and safe. Our union is hugely diverse, and we hailed from over 60 countries and speak dozens of languages. But we are united in our fight to ensure all people, regardless of the color of their skin, their immigration status, or their income, can live a safe and healthy life with dignity and respect. As a member leader in the union, one of the things that I most is passionate about is that Democrats process and talking with my union brothers and sisters. When members come together, we can make a difference and win progress for working families. However, New York City current campaign finance law that governs how I can communicate with my fellow union members make it harder to involve more of them in politics. For example, the expense of organized members to canvass and talk to their fellow members is counted as a campaign contribution. If the candidate has been briefed by the union and is present to talk to the member beforehand. This law discourages unions for engaging members face-to-face on political issues and encourages them to simply make a contribution directly to candidates or buy media ads. The city's treatment of members-to-member communication is different from federal law in other cities and states. This is a shame. In my experience, allowing members to hear candidates describe what they are fighting for is, if elected, before going out to canvass their fellow members, is one of the best ways for them to understand the issues and feel connected to the democratic process. I strongly support using the charter revision process so that labor and membership organizations and communities freely with their members, even if the communications are coordinated with candidates. We should be doing everything we can to encourage more civil participation. Thank you for your time and your efforts to ensure that our democracy works for all, including working people and unions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Let me thank you because organized labor has been present at a number of these hearings, and it's very important that we hear the voices of your brothers and sisters, and I think you were very good tonight. So my thanks to you for taking the time to come.
Thank you. Thank you. 32BJ.
James Hong.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is James Hong, and in 2012 and 13, when the city was undertaking the redistricting of all 51 city council districts, my then organization, the Minkwon Center for Community Action, led ACCORD, a coalition of 13 Asian American organizations in advocating for an end to the gerrymandering of Asian American neighborhoods. That coalition actually included Chaya CDC, where Commissioner Cicheron is. And together, we engaged the state, city, and federal levels of redistricting. Now, during our efforts at the city council, we witnessed tremendous pressure being exerted behind the scenes by political operatives, such as a former state senator who had held office for 40 years in Eastern Queens, and whose protege was in the city council at the time. Amazingly, this politician of decades had been appointed to the New York City Districting Commission. And in his role, he helped cement a more easily winnable district for the city council member, who had been blatantly anti-Asian in his prior campaign against an Asian American candidate. Despite multiple organizations and individuals speaking to the identity and the shared understandings of Bayside, a neighborhood in Queens, the Districting Commission actually split Bayside even further, moving portions of it into the adjacent district and increasing voter dilution. Now, I bring this up because Chapter 2A of the Charter does support in Section 52B fair, quote, fair and effective representation of the racial and language minority groups, end quote, in New York City protected under the Voting Rights Act, and lines that, quote, keep intact neighborhoods and communities with established ties of common interest, end quote. This is great. However, this directive was undermined by the political will of an incumbent and a longtime politician invested in that incumbent's career. In closing, our districting commission in our charter is not an independent redistricting commission, which is sorely needed in this city and for all states and municipalities. Which brings me to two requests of the commission. First, amend the charter to restrict any former elected officials from serving on the districting commission. And second, amend the charter to eliminate the direct appointment of districting commission members by current elected officials. Now, this is a little aside from the example that I gave, but the mayor and the city council should not be appointing the very individuals tasked with determining something so directly impacting those who placed them there in that position as a commissioner. The conflict of interest is tremendous. So just in closing, I do want to offer up California's re-engineering of its redistricting process before its 2010 cycle, one that has been hailed by advocates as one of the most independent and free of political pandering. I hope you'll consider this model for New York City. Our charter should make redistricting, which is a critical component of democracy, shielded from self-interested pressures, and ensure that all of New York City's communities are respected and their voting rights upheld.
Thank you very much. Let me just make a quick comment, because this is something that the Commission certainly has to be concerned with. The decision by the Supreme Court in Shelby took away the pre-clearance requirement, not just in southern states, but in New York City. What you are suggesting, although you didn't say it, that there's a conflict between this idea that the Charter at one point calls for ensuring and protecting the civil rights of minority groups, and the fact that no one any longer, no body any longer will review the lines that are created by the Districting Commission, which, as you noted, is appointed by current elected officials. I'm not asking you a question. I'm asking my fellow commission members what their reaction is to your comments.
Well, thank you so much for testifying today. You know, the idea of independent redistricting commissions is something that you know, I've come across a lot in my work, and you know, no one likes partisan gerrymandering, right? And there's a view out there that an independent redistricting process will address those concerns. But what I remember from the 2010 debates in California were that actually, you know, minority communities were concerned that an independent redistricting commission might not be sufficiently attentive to making sure there's adequate representation for communities of color. The map in California turned out to be, I think, generally speaking, pretty good in that regard. But there was a concern, I think, also, not just in terms of the map itself and how it would turn out, but also about representation on an independent commission, you know, at a time when there are more elected officials of color than probably at any point in our nation's history, that's the precise moment when we want to take the redistricting power away from elected officials and put it into an independent body. I'm not saying that that's my view or my criticism, but I'm just sort of wondering how you respond to those kinds of concerns.
Well, in the sort of the guidelines for choosing the commissioners in the California process, there is actually in the New York City Charter currently, a reference to sort of the diversity of the commission. So it's in there, and they have guidelines for that. So I think I'm sure there were those concerns were founded, but like you said, the results, I think it speaks to the process to some degree. And I think, Commissioner Ho, I mean, I know that you are deeply in this work, and so I would defer to you on the knowledge of the California Commission. But, I think our city's charter right now has good elements in it, such as that, a reference to the voting rights, to language diversity and ethnic minority communities. It needs to be stronger, and I think we can get some good elements from the California Commission.
I'm just wondering if also, in addition to maybe changing the process of redistricting, if you think it might also be a good idea to change the actual substantive requirements of redistricting to do more to enhance representation of communities of color. I mean, California also has, not in their constitution, but a California Voting Rights Act, which goes beyond the Federal Voting Rights Act in terms of what it demands for representation of communities of color. And I know that's not what you came here to testify about specifically, but
I would totally support that.
Okay.
Thank you. I encourage all the commissioners to discuss that. I'm not familiar with the details of that, but it's I know they have a very strong voting rights law over there.
Go ahead. You have a mic?
Thank you for your testimony, James. As you mentioned, my organization worked on this issue previously, but so I know that this is we've seen this play out time and time again in Queens. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the alternative of how you would form a commission that is more accountable and transparent.
Mm-hmm. So again, I wish I was more versed on how the process in California is. However, what I am aware of is that there's a panel, there's a sort of a commission that then chooses a commission. So it's sort of like like a body that will elect or sort of sift through applications to be on the commission. In California, I believe the resulting commission was 14 members. And for those 14 members, there was something like 30,000 applications. And then there was a pretty detailed process of sort of diversifying the resulting body. Again, I think Commissioner Ho would know very well about this, honestly. But I'm also, of course, happy to follow up on any requests for information. But it was sort of twice removed, at least from any elected. I'm not sure how that initial body was formed, but it was already twice removed from any involvement by an elected official. Yeah.
Commissioner Ho, since you're going to be doing all this work,
well, just one other question. We've been talking about redistricting a little bit in the abstract, but you started by talking about the last redistricting process, and I just was wondering if you could just say a little bit about today, in your view, what is the current state of representation for Asian American communities in Queens on the New York City Council? Is there a lack of representation that you think needs addressing by improving the redistricting process?
Well, Asian Americans are right now, over 15% of the city, probably 16%. Out of city council members, I believe there's 2 that are, out of the 51, there's 2 that are Asian American. Now, I don't think, there needs to be a one-to-one correlation of, like sort of race and representation, but, at the city level, I think there could be better in places like Bensonhurst in Brooklyn, in Bayside, as I mentioned, in Richmond Hill. We saw, fragmentation that continued even after the redistricting process of last time, where Asian American communities that had already been established were not recognized in the districting process, unfortunately. So, the example that I gave was just a very clear one where we could see that there was an incumbent interest there, but I think it happened in many parts of the city. So,
anyone else?
Yeah.
Aneta?
Just to add and to answer your question, Commissioner Ho. For example, I'll just say that the South Asian population in Queens is quite significant, and there is no South Asian representative. And specifically Richmond Hill, there have been South Asian candidates running since the 70s, consistently, and have gained very little inroads into achieving elected office.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions, I can assure you, Mr. Hahn, that we're going to be looking very closely at this question of redistricting and the impact it has on the ability of people to get elected and to encourage people to run.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
John Cho.
Chair Perales and members of the Commission, thank you for coming out to Flushing, the most diverse and dynamic community in America. Since 1645, when Flushing was established by the Dutch, our community has welcomed people from around the world with open arms, regardless of race, ethnicity, or religion. Flushing now has hundreds of languages and hosts the highest concentration of houses of worship in the United States. Generations of immigrants have found economic opportunity in Flushing, which is now the 4th largest commercial district in New York. And according to the census, 52% of the population in Community Board 7, which includes Flushing, is of Asian descent. 26% are white, 18% are Hispanic, 2% are black. However, the diversity is not reflected in the demographics of those appointed to serve on and officially represent Community Board 7. 54% are white, 38% are Asian, 6% are black, and 2% are Hispanic. When you look at the leadership of Community Board 7, the chair and the 4 vice chairs, the disparity between appointed officials and the community they serve is even starker. 100% of the community board's officers are white. While I cannot provide statistics of the age distribution of Community Board 7 members, I can tell you that there are very few who are 40 years or younger. Why is this important? A few months ago, as an example, CB7 voted against a variance that would have allowed a nonprofit organization to build a new health clinic and expand their services to more than 40,000 low-income people in our community. This clinic would have addressed an important need in our community, improved healthcare outcomes for low-income immigrants of color. Despite overwhelming evidence that this population does not own cars, certain members of Community Board 7 insisted that parking requirements be strictly followed regardless of the circumstances, and the project was rejected. The vote was a shameful reminder of how removed many members of Community Board 7 are from this neighborhood that they are sworn to represent and serve. We cannot let another decade pass with hundreds of similar votes by similarly unrepresentative community boards. There is too much at stake, and I urge the Charter Revision Commission to act. At a minimum, The city needs to establish term limits for community board members. We have too many entrenched people who are disconnected from the neighborhoods they were supposed to represent. In Flushing, we have a community board that does not represent our full diversity. We need people of different backgrounds, perspectives, and ages. People who understand that our neighborhoods are constantly changing and that government needs to adapt as well. I have much more to offer, but that's all I have to say at this moment.
You've made a very good point. We've heard this before about problems and concerns about community boards. We've also heard about the desire to have term limits for members. And so I'm glad to have heard your comments. Anyone else have anything they want to add? If not, I thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Shirley Phipps.
Good evening to all. My name is Shirley Phipps. I reside at 8732 Off 4th Street, Hollis, New York. I'm a native Queens resident, born, raised here, schooled here, worked here, retired here. And I love Jamaica, Queens. I'm familiar with the south side and the north side of Queens. My issue today pertains to Section 6 of the Charter. Heads of departments appoint and remove. The mayor shall appoint the heads of administrations, departments, all commissioners, and other officers not elected by people, except otherwise provided by law. My statement is the police commissioner in New York City, fire department commissioner in New York City, and New York City School Chancellor. The people of New York City should be able to vote on the above commissioners due to daily responsibilities to the public. The police commissioner has the force of police officers who have charge of New York City residents for public safety, and therefore the commissioner should be accountable to the people. The people should have a right to interview, ask questions of the mayor's appointment prior to an election. The residents of New York City pay taxes, and as taxpayers, we should have a right to elect a commissioner, and the process can be open to other qualified candidates. Prior to elections, same process as an elected official running for office. The same for FDNY and New York City School Chancellor. The mayor could appoint a nominating committee to have candidates submit their names. The mayor nominating committee will be responsible for the election process. The election of candidates will be nonpartisan. The candidates will be responsible to finance their own campaigns. And the reason why I say this, as being here a long-time resident, we've had so many issues in the city with our police commissioners, and I feel the mayor's choice may not be enough anymore. As we look at Eric Gardner, fire department, they had a very big lawsuit where there were discriminatory practices in hiring African-American men and women, where there was a big lawsuit, and they had to reform how they're going to hire firefighters. The police commissioner under Kelly stopped question and frisk. 700,000 people stopped question and frisk, and nothing was really found, maybe some marijuana. The purpose of stop question and frisk was to look for guns, and most of the time they didn't find guns, or not even hardcore drugs. If you study the court cases that came up under stop question and frisk, a lot of it was not what it's supposed to be. And the policy that they implement for stop question blanketed people of color. If you have a policy, you cannot blanket people of color. It has to be for everyone. I live in South Jamaica. I see what they've done on Linden Boulevard, Murray Boulevard, stop question and frisk. Once they just stop and they frisk. You go on Main Street, you go on Flushing, you go to Bayside, you go to Forest Hills. I've never seen a white male stop question and frisk on the streets as I've seen in South Jamaica. So I think we need people, commissioners that come before the body of people. We pay taxes here. We have a right to have commissioners that are going to really serve the people. and not the politics or how they want to institute policies to our people or to anyone where it's not fair. So this is my statement.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
I hear you. But if the commissioner of police messes up after he's elected, who would fire him? If the fire commissioner messes up after he's elected, who would fire him or her? I forget her because we are just as competent as the men. And if the chancellor for the Board of Education was elected and he messes up, who would be the point person to fire the person? I just want to make sure that you've thought of the entire process where we put responsibility. When you elect a mayor, you should elect a mayor who you know is understanding of all of the needs of the people, so that whomever he appoints and they disappoint us, that we can go to him and say it's time to fire. But if we elect them, we have to wait till another election before we can fire him.
Well, it's just like our elected
How would you
officials.
do that? Do you
It's
have
like
a
our elected
process?
officials. Most elected officials, if they're convicted of corruption or if they're running and they have a corruption case against them, people don't usually vote for them. But I mean, like I said, that's a process. That's a process that can be looked at by the nominating committee. If he appoints the nominating committee, it can still come back to the mayor. I'm just putting this out there. No, a lot of things. There's a lot of things that would have to be reviewed and understood.
Anyone else? Carl?
Yeah, Carl Bragg. I agree with your concerns because as a young black man who was born in Brooklyn, raised in Southeast Queens, I've not only seen bias, but experienced it myself. I'm not quite sure, though, that your recommendation to have citywide elections for those commissioners is the answer. What the answer is, I'm not sure of either, but I know we need to have an answer, and I agree with that. And I want to thank you for coming here and providing your testimony.
All right, thank you very much. Any other question?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Jesse Conrad. Is there a Jesse Conrad in the room? No longer in the room, apparently. Joby Jacob?
Somebody left their glasses.
Their glasses, someone left the glasses on the table? Someone who gave testimony?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Commissioners, my name is Joby. I reside in Hollis Hills, and I'd like to speak about two topics. One is Vision Zero. I'm a big believer in Vision Zero, the proposition that no one, whether they're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a driver, should die in traffic crashes. We've made a lot of progress towards Vision Zero goals. But as we have seen in the last year in Washington, a new administration can undo all our hard work. I would like to see the charter amended to protect progress on Vision Zero. The DOT Commissioner's duties and powers should include Vision Zero, and the charter should include verbiage to ensure that the Vision Zero task force meets regularly. And the second topic I'd like to talk to you about is community board reform. Community boards are full of dedicated public servants who volunteer their time to represent their neighborhoods. I count many of them as my friends, and they need to be applauded for their service. But there is need for reform. If I join my CB today and stay on for 30 years, it's unreasonable to expect that my views would reflect the values of society in 2048. As over 30 years, society changes. Many CB members have served 30+ years, and while I applaud their dedication and service, isn't it fair to say that most New York City neighborhoods demographically look nothing like they did 30+ years ago? Is a board thus composed truly reflective of the community? I don't know what the answer to this is. Is it term limits? Is it elections? At the very least, all boards should be required to publish demographic data that shows what the board looks like, including information about race, ethnicity, how they get around, so that people can look at their own communities and compare and see if their community board is representative of them. I would also like to suggest that while it is appropriate for a CB to bring an item to DOT's attention, it is not appropriate for public safety to be subject to a vote. In Turturro versus City of New York, the city was found liable after a Brooklyn CB torpedoed a plan to enact safety improvements on Gerritsen Avenue. Protecting lives is the first and most fundamental job for government. Thus, DOT should not feel that CBs have a veto on street safety improvements, and the charter's language should reflect this. Right now, DOT is required to seek approval from every CB for any change on the street. Unfortunately, not everyone can attend community board meetings. I would encourage that all community board meetings be live streamed just like this meeting, so that people can access this information. And one last thing I'd like to say, if I may, CB practices and procedures seem haphazard and seem to vary from board to board. The charter should empower the council to define and standardize rules and procedures for all boards. So, you know, if I move from one neighborhood to the next, I should know how the board should function. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments?
I just want to say that's great testimony, and I commend you for your thoughtfulness and for the words you've put in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Benedict Josen.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you, Commissioners, the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit, and others for organizing this. My name is Benedict Josen, a resident of Flushing, Queens, and co-founder of 260 by 26, a global organization focused on children's education and youth skills. Given that I have minimal knowledge on the charter, my inputs are more on the process than on the content. For any civic and communal effort to achieve its potential, it must be intergenerational and inclusive of young people. On this note, I highly encourage that the Commission and the revision process be more accessible and inclusive of youth, and this applies across government. This could mean including high school and college-age New Yorkers on the Commission as decision makers. This could mean hosting these hearings at New York City high schools and colleges so that students can readily attend and participate. This could mean providing educational content to students on the charter that aligns with their proficiencies. At the core of these recommendations is that there is active participation and leadership from youth in the Commission and with the charter. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an important point. I think we're all sensitive to that.
That's another good point. You are very thoughtful, very smart, and we hear you.
Thank you.
Thanks. John Park, the Executive Director of the Minkwon Center.
Hello, thank you very much for coming out to our area to have this and listen. Appreciate it very much. My name is John Park. I'm the Executive Director of the Minkwon Center for Community Action. Before I sort of talk a little bit more, I also wanted to note that a few of us who are kind of plugged into these kinds of things, we heard pretty late about this. I don't know what kind of communications was happening around, like letting people know, you know, the days and times and the areas. But like for myself, we I didn't hear about this until pretty late in the process. So I just want to note that. James Hong, one of my colleagues, still a friend, former colleagues, spoke here very, very recently, right before I did. He would have much more details, and he spoke much more eloquently about the redistricting process. Back in 2010, I was also on ACCORD. I was a steering committee member of the Asian American Community Coalition on Redistricting and Democracy. And there are a couple takeaways that I had from that as well, and I just want to sort of double down on that. One thing that we learned is in terms of having levers and influences, in terms of having leverage over the districting process, choosing who would sit at the table was just as powerful as sitting at the table. And it was very clear to me at that point that we needed another level of independence between how the current redistricting commission was appointed. Because the influences were clear during that process, and we knew then that something had to be fixed about it. The other thing that was also clear was that when there was like a redistricting or an independent commission, it was almost like there was a veil of protection that existed now that wasn't there before. So even though there was a lot of various types of influences, incumbent protections, now people could point to, oh, but this is actually independent, when it was clear to us that it wasn't truly independent, and it even caused more problems and frustrations on our end. So just wanted to weigh in again on what my friend James Hong had said, that there should be another layer, another independent type of panel or commission to appoint the people who are going to sit at the table, and also agree with the suggestion earlier that we could strengthen locally our own voting rights protocols and processes to shore up what's happening on the federal level. Thank you.
I don't know. There may be some questions of you. Mm-hmm. Are there? No, you left so quickly that.
Yeah, well, I figure a lot of it was fleshed out with James already, so I didn't expect more to it.
I appreciate it.
And your testimony was quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we are going to look at the whole question of how the redistricting commission
Mm-hmm.
is selected, and whether or not there are other models that we might employ.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, because currently, I'll just add that the voting process is the most sacred thing that we can have, and the gerrymandering and the types of things that are happening is basically a loophole in our democracy. So it is one of those areas where we fundamentally, absolutely, categorically have to get right, because it immediately affects our communities directly. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would you like to testify? You did submit a sheet? Did I lose it? It's possible. I've lost everything. I apologize, Adrian. I'm glad I asked if there was anybody else that wanted to testify.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, there. Yes, it was my fault.
It's okay.
This says that you are from the League of Women Voters.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
So we certainly want to hear from you.
And I'm very pleased that you're here, because this time I only had to come 4 blocks. I live on Casino Boulevard, and usually I'm running around the city, so I'm delighted you're here. Thank you for coming to Flushing, and I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters, and I'm also the author of What Makes New York City Run, which is a citizen guide to the New York City Charter. And we've been publishing this book since 1978, and we're coming out with an updated version on as an ebook in about a month, and it's going to have links to city agencies. So
We'd
we're
like to
very
see it.
excited.
I mean-
Well, we'll see that you get a copy, and hope you all will get other copies. I'm going to talk about, summarize my presentation. I have written testimony. I'll talk about two issues, and the first one really is instant runoff voting. We've been talking about instant runoff voting in this city. We started in 2009 when they were ordering voting machines. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity to put in a computer program on instant runoff voting because we had spent $13 million in 2009 on a runoff. But that didn't happen, and in 2013 we had another runoff for the public advocate. Again, we spent $13 million on the runoff. The voting turnout was 6.9% of the eligible voters. I don't pride myself on my math, but I think that comes out to $650 per vote. 200,000 people voted, $13 million. I came out to $650 per vote. With instant runoff voting, we could do this in one election. With ranked choice voting, it's used in municipalities all over the country, and it could successfully be implemented in New York because we have a voting system which can be adapted to do instant runoff voting. We have a very secure voting system in New York. We're very pleased with it, and it could incorporate instant runoff voting. We hope you will consider this, because if you do, and it becomes a proposal that the voters vote on in November, we have 2.5 years to implement instant runoff voting, not only the computer program, but to do a successful voter education program. We're recommending it to do away with the runoff. That's our first priority. But we think it also can be used in other ways. One way would be to use it for military and absentee voters, because there's a very short time frame, particularly for military voters, to get ballots back on a second election. And we'd also like you to think about using it in special elections for city council, because the special elections have multiple candidates, nonpartisan, multiple candidates, very low turnout, and people can be elected to the city council with 20–25% of the vote if there are enough candidates. Instant runoff voting would mean that some candidate arrived at a threshold which would be representative of the population. So I know other people have spoken for this, and I'll take, if you'll let me do that, one more consideration. We think it's time to codify the Department of Education in the city charter. We have had a New York City Department of Education authorized by the state legislature for 16 years. You cannot find that department in the city charter. There is nothing about the Department of Education in the city charter. We think it's time to do that the parents of our 1.1 million school children, the teachers and the taxpayers should be able to look at the charter to see what the governance of the Department of Education is. Right now, you really have to depend on state law, and the labyrinth of figuring that out is beyond all of us. But if it were codified in the City Council, parents and teachers and citizens would understand what the Department of Education does. And we believe that this is time, 16 years since the legislature authorized mayoral control of the Department of Education. It's time to put it in the charter. There are other city agencies that function under state law, like the Department of Transportation and the I'm trying to think, and the Civil Service Commission that's in administrative services. They operate under state law. The police department operates under state law, but they can be in our charter. The state literally has the ability to change things in our charter anytime they want to, but to just not put the Department of Education in the charter because there's something that it's temporary, when no one has suggested any other form of governance, we believe it's time for the New York City Department of Education to be in the charter. And I have one personal request for the Commission. In order to access the New York City Charter at the present time, New Yorkers have to know that they have to go into administrative laws on the city's website, and then they can view the charter chapter by chapter. The last Charter Commission put the entire charter on its website or the city website as one document, which would be a much easier way. We understand it changes all the time, but while the life of the commission is dealing with a charter. It's a finite document, and we hope you'll put it on the website. Thank you.
you very much. Let me just make a comment before I ask the other commissioners if they have a question. One of the reasons I think that there's been hesitancy to put the Department of Education as part of the city charter is that there are still a lot of people who hope that they will go back to the day where there is a Board of Education, not just mayoral control. So it's a political thicket in some sense. Have you thought about that?
Well, we have, and I mean, as contentious as the reauthorization of state funds and of the mayoral control has been in Albany, and it's been ugly almost since the time it started, no one has suggested going back to the Board of Education. That, I haven't heard that, I haven't read that in any document, that was not seen as a viable model because no one was in control. I spoke about this at earlier charter revision commissions, and the answer was, well, if it were city control rather than mayoral control, the council would be more enthusiastic. That the council isn't enthusiastic because it's mayoral control. I don't know how you do this, but I think the time frame to say that it's 20% of our budget and it's not there. And no one has really come in with a bill or legislation or proposal for another form of control. That we haven't seen that. We haven't seen anybody propose another form of control. So you know, there's some people who will say it was better in the old days. I was around when we had the Board of Education, and some of our chancellors were wonderful people, but it was an impossible situation with not diversity, but with the spreading of control over with the borough president. So there may be people who said it, but they haven't proposed it. And I think certainly everybody would be interested in a proposal, but nobody has proposed anything. So that's all.
I understand.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
I think it's fascinating. I think we should consider it.
We will consider it.
Okay. Thank you
All
very
right.
much. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I will again ask if anyone else wants to testify. The hour draws late, so I hope this will be a brief comment.
Hi, my name's Edward Kiernan. I'm a member of Community Board 3 here in Queens. Cover Jackson Heights, Corona, East Elmhurst. And my main concern is that the community boards have diminished they've lost power, since, the time of the Board of Estimates. Now we get stuff thrown at us from DOT or from DOB, and we're kind of just told, just take it, deal with it. And we don't really have the input that boards used to have. And
I'm trying to figure out what you're saying. Is it that you don't think you have the capacity in terms of support?
No,
or
that
is it that you don't have the time, or
we don't have the authority?
You don't have the. Then why does somebody give it to you? Ask you for
They essentially ask us for a rubber stamp.
I see, but you cannot say no.
No.
And what you're asking for is greater authority?
What I would like is to, if you recall back when the Board of Estimates was in
yes.
power,
the borough president,
the way the boards worked
Yes.
then, we could actually say no to something.
I see.
And now we really can't. It's probably, it's...
Your comment has to do with the community boards and their lack of authority in some areas.
Right, exactly.
Well, we'll take that into consideration. Certainly lots of issues regarding community boards have been raised with us. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing no hands, I will ask for motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. There's a second. All in favor?
I'll second.
All in favor? Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion is passed, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
From a meeting with one panelist to a phone call with another. You. Call me on the car ride home. I'm going to call
What's
car,
that?
and my understanding is they are
Yes,
reimbursing.
they're getting better.
That's my understanding. I might be on the way for you. You might be able to actually do one card, but you can actually put two addresses into at least a Lyft. I don't know about an Uber.
I don't know how to do this.
You probably can do it with Uber.